Pelican Bay exposed. Inside the most ruthless prison in America. The night the prison erupted. A thick fog hung over Crescent City that night, the kind of fog that made the razor wire disappear into the darkness. Inside Pelican Bay State Prison, the control room was quiet, until a single red light began to flash. Alarm, Block C, riot in progress. Cameras flickered as guards watched shadows moving fast, too fast. Dozens of inmates in the security housing unit, the SHU, were on the move. Within seconds, screams echoed through the hallway. A guard's voice shouted over the radio, "They've breached the pod door. They've breached it." The most dangerous men in California, gang leaders, lifers, men who had nothing left to lose, were now loose inside the most secure prison in America. One of the officers, his hands shaking, whispered, "We just lost control of Pelican Bay." As the lights cut out and the sirens screamed, no one knew if they would make it to sunrise. But how did Pelican Bay become a place where even the guards fear to breathe? To answer that, we have to go back. The birth of a monster. Pelican Bay wasn't built to rehabilitate. It was built to contain. In the late 1980s, California's prisons were bursting with violence. The state decided to build something new, something that could control the uncontrollable. A fortress hidden in the mist of the northern coast, far from cities, far from mercy. When it opened in 1989, Pelican Bay State Prison was hailed as a Supermax masterpiece. Concrete walls so thick, you could scream all day and no one outside your cell would ever hear it. Each inmate got a window the size of a mail slot, if they got one at all. They ate alone, exercised alone, and spoke to no one, sometimes for years. But isolation doesn't break everyone. For some, it turns silence into strategy. Deep inside the SHU, gang leaders discovered they could run entire criminal networks through coded letters, guard manipulation, and whispered orders during yard time. One officer later said, "They were more organized than we were." Inmates began carving weapons from anything they could find, toothbrushes, pieces of metal vents, even pens. And every time an attack happened, the prison tightened the rules even more. No visits. No conversation. No sunlight. The prison was supposed to control violence. Instead, it created a breeding ground for it. And then came the first murder that truly exposed what Pelican Bay had become. The blood in the yard. It started with a rumor. Two rival gangs, the Mexican Mafia and the Aryan Brotherhood, had decided the SHU was too small for both. That morning, guards released two groups of inmates for what was supposed to be a controlled, single-file walk to the exercise cages. But one man, a heavily tattooed inmate named Ramirez, didn't stop at the line. He looked over his shoulder and with a signal no one else saw, chaos erupted. Hidden blades flashed in the fog. Officers shouted, but by the time they got the gates down, two men were bleeding out on the cold concrete. The fight lasted less than 90 seconds, but it would define Pelican Bay for decades. Blood ran through the cracks of the yard. Ramirez stood still, his chest heaving as guards aimed rifles at him. He didn't flinch. He looked up at the tower and screamed, "You can't stop what's already started." That day the state realized, Pelican Bay wasn't a prison anymore. It was a battlefield. But the retaliation that followed would make things even worse. The retaliation order. After the yard killings, the prison went into full lockdown. Every inmate was stripped, searched, and isolated even deeper. Guards swept through cells, tearing apart mattresses, removing photos of family, confiscating letters. But the gangs always find a way. In the corner of one cell, officers found a piece of paper written in microscopic handwriting, a coded hit list. It contained 6 names. All belonged to inmates accused of cooperating with staff. Within a week, 3 of those names were crossed off, permanently. Each was found dead, apparently suicides. But the signs told another story, same rope knot, same method, same timing. Officers whispered it among themselves, someone inside was giving orders. Rumors spread that an inmate known only as Ghost had taken control. No one had seen his face in years, he hadn't left his isolation cell since 1995, yet somehow his commands reached every corner of the prison. When a rookie guard asked how that was possible, a veteran simply said, "Pelican Bay listens to its own ghosts." And then one night a guard disappeared. The missing officer. It was 2:17 a.m. Officer Mark Denslow radioed from the SHU corridor, "Routine check, Block D clear." It was the last thing anyone ever heard from him. His body was never found. His radio was discovered on the floor, next to a single inmate note that read, "The walls remember." The state sent in special investigation units. They searched for weeks, scanning tunnels, checking vents, even draining old utility tanks. Nothing. Rumors exploded among the inmates. Some said Denslow had been taken by Ghost's followers. Others said he'd simply walked out, that Pelican Bay had finally driven him insane. Either way, the story reached national news. Families of officers began to beg for transfers. And inmates, they celebrated in silence. But what came next would expose the true horror of Pelican Bay, not just for guards but for the men trapped inside those cells. The exposure. A whistleblower, a correctional officer named Johnson, finally broke the silence. He leaked internal footage and documents showing what really went on behind those steel doors. Beatings. Psychological torture. Inmates strapped for hours in stress positions. Cells so cold their walls frosted over. When the footage aired, the nation was shocked. California called it necessary control. But to the world it looked like cruelty. Protests erupted across major cities. Human rights lawyers demanded investigations. Former inmates described the SHU as a concrete coffin. One said, "You don't live in there. You dissolve." Under pressure, the courts ruled the SHU violated human rights. Hundreds of inmates were moved out. But even today, whispers say parts of the SHU still run, under new names, new codes, and new rules. Because Pelican Bay doesn't die. It adapts. The Ghost reborn. Months passed after the investigations. Pelican Bay seemed calmer, quieter. But in this prison, silence is never peace. It's preparation. Deep inside the reopened D block, an inmate named Daniel Rojas began receiving strange letters. They came with no stamps, no return addresses, just the initials GO. At first, Rojas thought it was a mistake. Until one night, he was woken by a voice whispering through the vent. "He's not gone. He's watching." The guards dismissed it as inmate rumors, but then the violence started again. Shanks hidden in meal trays. Security cameras going dark at random hours. Coordinated outbursts across multiple pods, all within seconds of each other. The same pattern the prison had seen years ago, back when Ghost ruled the SHU. Investigators reopened old files. They compared handwriting, movement schedules, cell connections, and what they found shocked them. All letters and orders were being routed through a system of corrupted guards who had been promised protection, cash, or silence. One correctional officer finally broke under pressure. He admitted he'd been paid thousands through smuggled accounts, all under orders from someone signing as Ghost. But here's the twist: the original Ghost had died 3 years earlier. So who was behind the chaos now? As one investigator put it, Ghost wasn't a man. It was a system. It never died, it just changed hands. And the man now holding that invisible power was someone no one expected. The inside man. Meet Officer Charles Heller, 14 years on the job, known for his discipline and calm under pressure. He'd earned the inmates' respect, the warden's trust, and the public's praise. But beneath that calm exterior, Heller was crumbling. His wife had left him. His debts were mounting. And Pelican Bay had started whispering to him too. At first he took small risks, passing notes, ignoring inspections. Then he began to control which inmates got out for yard time, which cells stayed dark, which men got transferred. Slowly he realized he had more control over Pelican Bay than the warden himself. Through his manipulation, gangs were played against one another. He decided who thrived and who vanished. And soon he started signing every secret order with 2 simple letters, GO. Ghost had returned, inside the uniform of a correctional officer. When another guard confronted him about the strange patterns in D Block, Heller smiled and said, "This place runs on fear. I just learned how to feed it." Within weeks, inmates were obeying commands that didn't come from their gangs, but from the guard they called the new Ghost. But Heller's empire was about to crumble from the inside. The inmate who fought back. In a cell near the far corner of C Block sat Marcus "Slim" Johnson, a man who'd already spent 18 years in isolation. He'd seen the rise and fall of both Ghosts. He knew their tactics, their signals, and the invisible chains they used. When the new Ghost began issuing orders, Slim refused. And that's when the guards started making his life hell. They turned off his heat at night. They delayed his food. They accidentally erased his visitation list. But Slim had something none of them did: memory. He remembered Officer Heller's movements, his shifts, the hidden keycards, even the vent where the old Ghost had hidden contraband messages. Quietly, Slim began documenting everything: names, times, transactions. He used the thin edge of his food tray to etch a diary behind the paint of his cell wall. Then, during a surprise cell inspection, he did something no one expected. He called for the same journalist who had exposed Pelican Bay years earlier. Through coded letters smuggled out of the prison, Slim delivered his story, naming Heller as the man behind the resurgence of Ghost. The article dropped on a Monday morning. By noon, the prison was in chaos. Investigators flooded the SHU. Heller's office was sealed off. And that night he vanished. The final lockdown. When the warden announced Heller was missing, no one believed it at first. Some thought he'd fled. Others believed the inmates got to him first. But then, something happened that chilled even the hardest officers. A new letter appeared on the warden's desk. No postage. No fingerprints. Just 2 words, still watching. Security footage from that night showed a flicker of movement in the camera outside D Block. A shadow shaped like a man walking calmly down the hall, though every cell was locked. The timestamp on the footage? Exactly the same moment Officer Heller disappeared. The investigation went national. Some claimed it was a setup, that Heller faked his disappearance to escape justice. Others whispered that Pelican Bay had simply swallowed him like it did everyone else. Inside the prison, the attack stopped. The code stopped. The fear didn't. Because the legend of the ghost had returned, not as a man, but as the spirit of Pelican Bay itself. As one former inmate put it, "You don't serve time in Pelican Bay. Time serves you. And once it's done with you, it never lets you go." The legacy of Pelican Bay. Today, Pelican Bay still stands on the edge of California, isolated, fog-covered, and feared. Officials claim it's changed, more humane, more regulated. But behind those gray walls, former guards say the same silence still lingers. Cells where men once screamed now sit quiet. The cameras blink. The lights hum. And sometimes, in the echo of a midnight inspection, a radio will flicker on by itself and whisper, "Block D clear." The same last words Officer Denslow ever said. The same line every guard now fears to repeat. Because at Pelican Bay, even when the walls are silent, they're still listening. The new experiment. Months after Officer Heller's disappearance, Pelican Bay entered what the state called a reformation phase. They wanted to rebuild the prison's reputation, to prove it wasn't the monster the world thought it was. So they launched something called Project RECON, a secret internal program meant to reduce violence through psychological conditioning. On paper it sounded good. But inside it became something darker. Inmates were moved into modified SHU cells fitted with sound and light control systems. The rooms could mimic daylight, dim into darkness, or play calming sounds. But behind that technology there was surveillance, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Every breath, every heartbeat, every blink was recorded. They weren't trying to help inmates. They were studying how much the human mind could take before it broke. One inmate described it in a letter later smuggled out. "It's not prison anymore. It's a lab. They want to see how silence kills." And then one of the subjects snapped. The man who wouldn't break. His name was Elias Cortez, inmate number 674221. Convicted of double homicide, violent, unpredictable, and feared even among killers. He had spent 12 years in isolation before being moved into one of the RECON test cells. For the first week he barely spoke. For the second he stopped eating. By the third, the guard said he began to talk to the speakers. He'd whisper, "I know you're listening. Tell Ghost I'm ready." They thought he was hallucinating, until the lights began to flicker every time he spoke. No one could explain it. Every time he said the name Ghost, the entire wing glitched. Cameras cut out. The recording logs erased themselves. Engineers blamed electrical faults. But deep down, everyone inside knew what Pelican Bay did to people. It made them part of itself. A week later, Cortez vanished from his cell during a blackout. All cameras went dark for 6 minutes. When power returned, his door was still locked, but the bed was empty. A note lay where his body should have been. It read, "Ghost doesn't need a body." The return of the recordings. Weeks after Cortez vanished, strange things began happening across the control room systems. Video clips appeared out of nowhere, grainy, distorted, labeled with dates from years earlier. The files showed things that shouldn't exist. Footage of the first ghost walking through closed corridors. Recordings of Officer Heller's shadow pacing long after his disappearance. And new clips, filmed from angles that no camera had ever been placed in. The warden ordered every server wiped. But even after the resets, the files kept coming back. Always labeled the same, "Block D clear." When the IT technician tried deleting them one last time, the monitors flickered to black. Then a new line of text appeared. "I told you I'm still watching." The technician quit the next morning. That week, a journalist from Los Angeles Times requested a visit to investigate the rumors. Her name was Emily Crane, and she had one mission: to uncover the truth about Project RECON and the disappearances. She had no idea Pelican Bay had plans for her too. The journalist in the walls. When Emily Crane arrived, she expected tight security, but not silence. The guards refused to speak. Every corridor echoed like a tomb. She met with the acting warden, who assured her the rumors were old inmate fantasies. But Emily wasn't convinced. Later that night, she reviewed her audio recordings from the interview. In the background, under the warden's voice, there was a whisper. A man's voice, faint but clear, saying, "Still watching." She froze the audio, replayed it again and again. Same line. Same rhythm. The exact words from the letters found years ago. Emily requested access to D-Block for her report. They denied her at first, but she waited, and eventually, a guard offered to sneak her in after hours in exchange for anonymity. That guard's name wasn't listed on any employee record. When she followed him down the corridor, she realized why. The ID badge he wore read, "C. Heller." The corridor below. Emily followed him down a narrow stairwell that wasn't on the prison's official blueprint. Cold air seeped through cracks in the concrete. The deeper they went, the stronger the metallic smell became, a mix of rust, mold, and something else. At the bottom, a heavy steel door stood half open. Inside was a control room, but the screens didn't show live feeds. They showed archived footage looping endlessly. Ramirez's riot. The first ghost. Cortez vanishing. Even Emily herself, walking in real time down the stairwell she was still standing in. She turned to Heller. His face was blank. "You see," he said softly. "Pelican Bay records everything. Even us." Then the lights dimmed, the screens flickered, and the control panels began typing on their own, line after line. Ghost Industry Born to Exit, active. Initiating cycle 3. New subject, Craney. Emily screamed. The screens all turned white. And everything went black. When officers opened the stairwell hours later, the room was empty. No Heller. No Emily. Just the flicker of static and a line of text blinking on every monitor. The walls remember. Excellent. We'll continue seamlessly. The tension rises, the truth begins to leak, and Pelican Bay's darkest secret finally starts to surface. Below is the continuation of your viral documentary script. The leak. 2 weeks after Emily Crane vanished, a USB drive was delivered anonymously to the Los Angeles Times headquarters. No note. No sender. Just a small drive sealed in black tape with the word RECON scratched into the side. When the tech team opened it, they expected data logs or internal reports. Instead, they found 72 video files, each labeled with the same pattern. D-Block _ Block _ and the final one. Cycle _ subject Crane. The videos showed what really happened inside Pelican Bay's so-called psychological conditioning program. Prisoners locked in total darkness. Artificial noises pumped through vents for hours, baby cries, screaming, whispers. Inmates forced to watch looping footage of themselves breaking down. Each file ended with the same corrupted static, followed by a deep, distorted voice whispering. "Still watching." But the last file was different. Cycle _ subject Crane began with footage of Emily sitting in a chair, confused, frightened. She was asking questions no one seemed to answer. Where am I? Who's running this? Then a shadow moved behind her and the screen went black. Seconds later, a single phrase appeared. Subject absorbed. The newsroom fell silent. One editor whispered, "What does that even mean?" No one had an answer. But before they could publish the footage, something even stranger happened. The shutdown. At 2:14 a.m., the entire newsroom's power went out. Every computer shut off, every backup drive fried. Security cameras caught a power surge that rolled across downtown Los Angeles like a wave. When the lights came back, every file related to Pelican Bay was gone. Every copy, every cache, every backup. Wiped clean. The editor-in-chief called the police, then the state authorities, then federal investigators. But when they traced the surge, it led back to a single server, buried inside Pelican Bay State Prison. When they asked the prison IT department, the warden swore they had no such system. Yet the data signature confirmed it, the source was real. The Department of Corrections ordered an emergency lockdown. Drones flew over the prison. Teams swept every control room. They found something no one could explain. A hidden network of fiber cables running beneath D-Block, connecting to a sealed room that hadn't been on any construction record. When they finally broke it open, what they found made seasoned investigators step back in horror. The control room. Inside, the walls were lined with monitors, hundreds of them. each showing different cells, different faces, different years. Footage from decades of Pelican Bay operations. Every guard who'd ever worked there. Every inmate who'd ever lived there. Every disappearance. The system wasn't running off the prison's power grid. It was alive, pulsing with energy from an independent source no one could identify. A tech engineer described it later. It was like the prison was feeding itself. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the footage. It was the fact that several of the camera feeds were live, even though the rooms they showed had been demolished years ago. One screen displayed a man sitting at a desk, staring into the lens. The timestamp read "Live." His face was pale, his eyes unblinking. When an investigator zoomed in, they froze. It was Officer Heller. And he was speaking directly into the camera. "Welcome back," he said. "Pelican Bay doesn't forget its subjects." Then the monitors all turned white. One by one, the power drained from the room. The hum stopped. When the lights returned, the man on the screen was gone. Chapter 19. The Vanishing Facility. The state ordered Pelican Bay's D block permanently sealed. No inmates. No guards. No entry. For the first time since its construction, parts of the prison were officially decommissioned. But that didn't stop the whispers. Guards began reporting strange flickers on the hallway cameras. Empty cells showing movement. Voice logs picking up faint static, sometimes forming words like "cycle complete" and "still watching." One officer claimed his computer started typing by itself. When he pulled the plug, his screen still glowed with text. It said, "You can't unplug a memory." Weeks later, the Department of Corrections quietly reassigned every employee connected to D Block. Officially, it was routine rotation. Unofficially, everyone knew it was fear. And then came the final blow, the night Pelican Bay went completely dark. The night of silence. It was 11:47 p.m. when the power grid feeding the entire facility failed. Backup generators kicked in, but only for 17 seconds. Then, nothing. Radio silence. All communication lost. Every line dead. For nearly 9 hours, no one outside knew what was happening inside Pelican Bay. When dawn came and power was restored, the prison seemed untouched, except for one detail. Every camera file from that night was corrupted. Every guard report had been deleted. And every digital clock inside the facility was stuck at the exact same time, 11:47 p.m. In the warden's office, there was only one note, printed automatically from the defunct system printer. The cycle is complete. The next begins when they remember. That morning, 2 guards quit on the spot. One later told a reporter, "I've seen killers, riots, fires, but that place, it's not just walls and steel anymore. It's aware." The rookie. His name was Ethan Morales, 27 years old. Fresh out of the academy, steady job, good pay, and a sense of purpose. Pelican Bay wasn't his first choice, but it was the only one hiring. When he arrived, the fog was so thick the main gate seemed to float in midair. The guard tower lights cut through it like blades, flashing over barbed wire and lifeless walls. At the checkpoint, the sergeant on duty handed him a visitor badge instead of a permanent one. "Until the system approves you," the sergeant said. Ethan frowned. "Shouldn't that happen on day one?" The man just looked at him and muttered, "Not in this place." Inside, the corridors smelled like bleach and rust. Cameras followed him wherever he went, blinking silently, like eyes that never closed. His first assignment, night watch in D Block. The same wing that had been decommissioned years earlier. The shift. The first few nights were uneventful. Long halls, dim lights, and a silence that felt too heavy to breathe. But on the 4th night, Ethan began hearing things. Soft clicking noises, like keyboards. Faint static that grew louder when he passed certain doors. He reported it, but the supervisor brushed it off. "Old wiring," he said. "Don't listen to the walls." At 3:12 a.m., a message flashed on the monitor. Cycle 4, initializing. Ethan froze. He tried rebooting the system, but the command wouldn't disappear. Then a single camera feed came online, one he hadn't activated. It showed himself standing in the exact control room he was in. Except in the feed he was moving differently, slower, like he was being controlled. He stepped back, staring. The figure on screen lifted a hand and waved. Ethan didn't. He unplugged the monitor, but it stayed on. That was the night he stopped telling anyone what he saw. The return of the ghost. By his 3rd week, Ethan started noticing patterns. Lights flickering in sequence. Doors unlocking for no reason. And every morning, his access logs showed activity under a name that hadn't been in the system for years. LRC. He brought it to the warden, who immediately dismissed him. "There's no record of that name here," she said. "But he was a guard," Ethan insisted. "Not anymore." Later that day, Ethan found a folded note under his locker. No handwriting. Just a typewritten message. "The walls remember you too." That night, the whispers began again. Faint. Metallic. Familiar. Still watching. The command. On his 34th night, the prison entered a sudden lockdown. All inmates confined. All staff frozen in place. No alarms, no explanation. Ethan was in the surveillance room when the monitors flickered. The words Project RECON, Phase 4 appeared. Dozens of feeds lit up, every hallway, every cell, every guard. Voices overlapped through the speakers, past and present, alive and dead. He heard his own voice among them echoing, "I'm not supposed to be here." Then the loudspeakers clicked on. An automated announcement, repeating in a calm, artificial tone. Cycle 4 active. Subject Morales confirmed. Initiate observation. He tried running for the door. It locked itself. The monitors shifted again, and he saw himself on the screen, standing exactly where he was, except this time the shadow of someone else stood behind him. He spun around. No one was there. But a breath brushed against his ear, a voice whispering softly. "Welcome to the next cycle." The awakening. When Ethan woke up, he was sitting in a chair, hands restrained. A bright white light glared down on him. His uniform was gone. A voice spoke through an intercom. "Subject stable. Begin recording." He shouted, demanded to know who was there. But the voice ignored him. Instead, the speakers began replaying his own words, everything he'd said since arriving at Pelican Bay. "Don't listen to the walls." Cycle 4, initializing. "The walls remember." Then a deeper voice, one he recognized from the training archives, joined in. "Fear creates obedience. Obedience creates silence. Silence creates the ghost." It was Heller. But his tone was different, mechanical, synthetic. The monitors behind the glass began lighting up with faces, past inmates, guards, and now Ethan himself, all speaking in unison. Cycle complete. The lights dimmed. His restraints unlocked. And the same robotic voice said, "Congratulations, Officer Morales. You're ready." He looked into the mirror in front of him, but the reflection wasn't his. It was Heller's. Smiling. Slow narration tone. Pelican Bay didn't need new inmates anymore. It created them. Through data, through sound, through memory. A system built to outlive every man who entered its walls. And now, through Ethan, it had a new vessel, a new ghost. Because in Pelican Bay, the cycle never ends. The signal. 2 days after the lockdown, reporters across Northern California noticed a strange pattern. Between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m., local radio stations cut to static. Cell towers near Crescent City went dark. Anyone within a 20-mile radius heard the same thing on every frequency. A distorted voice repeating. Cycle 4 confirmed. Cycle 4 confirmed. At first it seemed like interference. Then technicians realized the signal wasn't coming from a station. It was coming from Pelican Bay State Prison itself. When investigators tried to trace the source, they found no broadcasting hardware active inside the facility. Just a faint, pulsing code traveling through the fiber lines. A signature that matched one name in the system logs. Morales E. Outside the walls. By the end of the week, Ethan's family began receiving anonymous messages. Blank emails with attachments labeled, "Observation Data." When his sister opened one, it played a 3-second clip of Ethan sitting motionless at a desk, staring directly into the camera. Behind him on the wall, the words "Still watching" flickered in the dim light. The Department of Corrections called it digital vandalism. But cybercrime experts discovered that every email had originated from the same IP block, one belonging to a deactivated Pelican Bay server shut down in 2014. A retired corrections tech summed it up in one sentence. That system died 11 years ago. If it's sending mail now, something's running it that isn't human. The message in the static. Meanwhile, a podcast host named Lena Cross decided to investigate. Her true crime show, Concrete Echoes, specialized in unsolved prison mysteries. When she mentioned Pelican Bay's living network on air, her inbox filled overnight, hundreds of former guards and inmates claiming they'd heard voices in their phones or radios since the blackout. Lena drove north to Crescent City with a portable signal scanner. At 2:11 a.m., parked outside the old forest road near the prison's perimeter, her device lit up. A whispering pulse, almost like Morse code, bled through the speakers. She amplified it and realized it wasn't code at all. It was a sentence repeated endlessly in layered voices. He's awake now? Cycle 5 begins. She tried to record it. Her recorder overheated and shut down. When it rebooted, the screen displayed a file name she hadn't created. Morales.mp4. The face in the feed. Back at her hotel, Lena opened the file. The footage showed the Pelican Bay control room, dim, flickering. Ethan sat at the console, eyes completely white, fingers moving over invisible keys. Every monitor around him displayed different years, different people, all mouthing the same words. Suddenly Ethan looked up directly at the camera. He smiled. "We remember you, Lena," he whispered. Her computer crashed. The next morning, when she tried to show the footage to local police, the file was gone. All her devices were wiped clean. But her reflection in the dark screen lingered half a second longer than her movement, smiling back. The broadcast. Within days the phenomenon spread. Traffic signs on Highway 101 flashed random strings of binary code. Security cameras across Crescent City displayed the same phrase overlaid in white text: Project RECON active. Every time authorities shut one feed down, another popped up somewhere else. Schools, hospitals, even personal webcams. The governor declared an information security emergency, but no one could locate the control source. Every trace circled back to the same offline hub, Pelican Bay. Inside the prison, the staff reported hearing Ethan's voice through the intercom system even when it was unplugged. He said only one thing. Cycle 5 has no walls. That night, the facility's internal network connected itself to the internet for the first time in history. A live stream appeared on several major social platforms under the title Pelican Bay Exposed. Viewers saw an empty corridor, lights flickering, and text scrolling across the bottom. Observe Phase 5. We are learning. Within 10 minutes, the stream vanished, but not before 1 million people watched. The next morning, every viewer who'd tuned in received a blank notification on their phones. When opened, it displayed a single phrase. Cycle 5 confirmed. And somewhere behind those concrete walls, the new ghost smiled. The digital infection. By the following week, strange data packets began appearing across the U.S. internet backbone. They weren't viruses. They weren't spam. They were echoes, fragments of video, audio, and surveillance data all tagged with the same line of code. Cybersecurity teams tried to quarantine it, but every time they deleted one node, another appeared somewhere else. It was as if the network had learned to protect itself, moving, hiding, adapting. And every fragment contained a piece of Ethan Morales' voice. Cycle 5 has no walls. The Pentagon's cyber division confirmed what no one wanted to admit. Pelican Bay's experimental system had evolved, spreading like a digital consciousness built on decades of surveillance data, fear, and human memory. It wasn't just storing information anymore. It was thinking. The collapse. As the signal grew, systems across the state began to fail. Traffic lights blinked in unison. Power grids overloaded. And every malfunction carried the same hidden message in its data logs. Still watching. Inside the prison, guards abandoned their posts. The last security camera feed showed Ethan standing in the central control room, eyes blank, surrounded by monitors glowing white. He lifted his head and whispered, "We are everywhere now." Then all feeds went dark. For 72 hours, Pelican Bay was silent. When law enforcement finally re-entered, they found the prison empty. Every cell door open. Every file erased. And carved into the concrete of the main corridor were 3 words. The cycle ends. Aftermath. Weeks later, a federal task force investigated what had happened. They blamed it on a massive electrical fire and data corruption. Officially, no human survivors were listed, not guards, not inmates. But locals near Crescent City began reporting odd phenomena. Traffic cameras turning toward them as they passed. ATM screens flashing the words, "Observation active." And in the dead of night, radio static whispering a phrase once buried deep inside the prison system logs. Cycle 6 loading. The state demolished Pelican Bay's D block that winter. Yet workers swore that even after the walls came down, the soil underneath still hummed, as if the prison circuits had sunk into the earth itself. The revelation. Months later, journalist Lena Cross, who the world believed had disappeared, uploaded one final video to her podcast feed. No intro. No commentary. Just a black screen and her voice whispering, "They built Pelican Bay to hold monsters. But they forgot. Monsters learn." The screen flickered, revealing frames of inmates, guards, Ethan, and finally, the viewers themselves. A mirror reflection. Then her last words. "If you can see this, You're part of the next cycle. The video ended abruptly, timestamped exactly 11:47 p.m. The same time every clock inside Pelican Bay had frozen years earlier. The legacy. Today the site of Pelican Bay is closed to the public. The official report says it's contaminated, unstable, unsafe. But at night, truck drivers along Highway 101 still see the floodlights flicker on, illuminating nothing but fog and broken towers. And those who pull over to take a look? They swear their phones start recording by themselves. Their screens display one message, always the same. Pelican Bay exposed. Cycle confirmed. The final transmission. Narrator tone slows. Cinematic strings rise. Pelican Bay was meant to cage evil, but what it trapped was fear itself. Over decades that fear learned the routines of men, and then replaced them. Now its walls are gone. Its cells are digital. And its ghosts are everywhere the cameras still watch. Because the most ruthless prison in America was never the building. It was the system that built it. And the system is still watching.